Welcome to the Punk CX podcast. My name is Adrian Swinscoe. I'm an advisor, author, and general explorer of the service and experience space. My guests tend to have just released some interesting research. They run a company that has some interesting tech in the service and experience space. They are part of an organization that is doing some cool stuff, or they run their own business doing interesting things for both their customers and or their employees. That's enough from me. Let's get into the interview. So welcome to the next edition of the Punk CX podcast. With me today, I have Sid Banerjee, who is the Chief Strategy Officer at Medallia. Now, before I introduce Sid or ask Sid to introduce himself, I was looking up the records. So I've known Sid for a while, and I was wondering, I was like, well, have I had Sid back on the podcast before? And I looked back in my records and I was like, oh my God. I should say welcome back to the podcast, because Sid and I first spoke on this podcast before it was a Punk CX podcast. It was a Rare Business podcast, and it was back in 2014. And I was like, oh my God, time has flown. But so Sid, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you, Adrian. I do remember it. I recall it like it was yesterday. I think you and I probably had a little bit darker hair at the time, but it's good to be back. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. And for, I mean, as I said, I would love to think that I had subscribers, diligent subscribers that have been around for the last 11 years, but I don't assume that. So, Sid, can you give me a thumbnail sketch, a bit of a background on kind of you, so that you introduce yourself to our listeners?
No, I appreciate that. So when we spoke back 11 years ago, it's hard to even say that. I was the CEO of a company called Clarabridge. We had come to market back in the sort of late 2000 knots and then the early teens as a CX vendor that was focused on bringing together all kinds of unstructured and structured data to help companies better understand the voice of the customer. So, chats and call transcripts and surveys and social media and a bunch of different things. And that business was really just taking off in a big way in the early 2000 teens. Since then, we grew the company, globally and in size and stature. And in 2021, we sold the business. I ended up working for the acquirer for about just shy of 3 years. Mm-hmm. Took a year off. I thought it might have been a retirement, but I now think of it as my gap year, which was in 2024. Traveled the world, checked off a bunch of bucket list items. And then at the end of 2024, when I was realizing I probably still had another quarter or two left in the game, I was persuaded to come back to work at Medallia, which I did, and have been here since the beginning of 2025.
Perfect. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, because that's one of the first things I wanted to ask you about, because it was back in January, mm-hmm. I think, of this year, 2025, when Medallia announced a new leadership team, and I saw that, and I was like, oh, it was headed up by Mark Bischoff, and I was like, oh, okay. And then he was like, and Sid Banerjee's coming out of retirement in air quotes, or on a sabbatical, or back from his travels, or his gap year, and then subsequently, people like Fabrice Martin from back in the Clarabridge kind of days, as well as etc., and started joining you too. And I thought, wow, they're getting the Clarabridge band back together.
We really are.
And I was thinking, blimey, what was it that tempted you back into the fold? I mean, is there more to do? Unfinished business? Kind of what's the skinny, as they say?
Yeah, no, I think there really was. I left the biz, if you will, back at the end of 2024. Large language models, LLMs, ChatGPT, all of that really kind of exploded into the scene of computing and analytics and AI at the end of 22, but it really had a big impact in 23. So I was watching this mm-hmm. kind of tidal wave of kind of transformation happening all through my last year before I kind of checked out for a bit. And in 2024, while I was traveling the world and just kind of enjoying my life, I realized that there was even more evolution happening. And particularly, not just in all the different ways that you see AI in the consumer-facing world, but in CX. Mm-hmm. And I had ideas. I started writing things down, had a bit of a notebook over the course of the summer about what I might want to do, what kinds of companies I might want to at least incubate or guide or manage or do other things with. And then at the end of that summer, I did get a call from Mark. Mark had been prior to and following our time together at Clarabridge. He was a general partner at the PE firm that actually acquired Medallia, a company called Thoma Bravo. Mm-hmm. And he had been approached about the idea of potentially stepping in to help kind of lead the business to the next wave of growth. he called me. I was one of the first calls he made, and he said, "Would you like to join? I think I want to bring this team back together. It won't be the same if you're not there." And of course, he, he applied all those, ego drivers and all that. And I thought, I had been thinking on my own about doing it. And as we went through the process and I dug into the business and met with some of the investors and some of the leaders that are still here, I realized that this is a fantastic platform for evolution, right? I mean, the Medallia has had a very good track record, particularly over the last, 5 to 7 years, of making smart investments to kind of prepare for this next wave of AI. It has signals from a lot of different conversational and CX sources. It had built and acquired a very good, robust platform. It had smart people that had been kind of pioneers in the space. And frankly, it had customers who were primed to look for that next wave of innovation. And what we really needed to do is come in here and just basically fill that demand, right? With both continuing leadership, continuing innovation, and just making sure that we stay connected to our customers and to the technology as it rapidly evolves. And I got excited about it. That's a long story short. So I came in and here we are.
Nice. I mean, I remember, what's fascinating, I remember when we were at Clarabridge, you were one of the first, when people talked about sort of NLP sort of techniques, and then it was graduated up to NLU, and then you were playing around with NLG before generative AI was even a thing.
We had a lot of precursor technology, experimentation and innovation. And so I felt pretty mentally prepared for LLMs when they came out. I think we were probably all large language model. We were all surprised at how good they were and how quickly they got better. But yeah, I mean, I do feel like my past experience does prepare me well, hopefully for this next wave. Understanding language at scale, understanding emotion and sentiment at scale, and then understanding how to actually complete ideas and make recommendations, which we had been working with really in 2017, 18, 19, before LLMs came out. So we had a sense of the utility of this technology. What this current wave of AI has done is it's turbocharged the entire market.
Yeah.
And I actually think, and I've used this term at our user conference a few months ago, I believe that this current wave of AI technology is going to help unleash a renaissance, if you will, of CX.
Right.
A new way of using technology to get closer to and to ultimately build stronger relationships with the customers.
And if I may, I wanted to dig into some of those kind of things that because I bumped into you rather, we bumped into each other. I bumped into you because I was in Jenny your colleague invited me to along to the Medallia event because I just happened to be in Vegas, and we bumped into, and I'd listened to you. I was able to listen to you kind of like speak and share a few ideas. And there's some things I wanted just to rummage around with you a little bit on kind of like drawing on your experience and also your perspective kind of like now. And one of the first things I wanted to ask you about was like omni-channel, right? Because I mean, you could argue that for the longest time, being able to deliver an omni-channel experience was the objective for brands. And then Gen AI came along, and then omni-channel was like kind of like chucked away. It does seem to have gone away in the conversation. I mean, what's your point of view on what's happening out there? Because I was a recent guest on the podcast. It was Gaurav Pasi from Zingli, and said like, actually the promise of omnichannel prior to generative AI was a bit of a myth, actually. And so I wanted to get your perspective on where we're at with that, because it's still a promise.
Yeah. No, I think, I have kind of two perspectives on this omnichannel. So there is both with this current wave of CX innovation happening, particularly powered by some of the newer AI technologies. There's both a regression away from omnichannel, but there's also a movement towards omnichannel that's probably not being called that as much. And let me tell you what I mean. So when you think about any new technology, it's often adopted in very kind of narrow silos, right? Think about text analytics, right? Which is sort of my old business back in the 2010s. We were one of the first in my old company to actually think about bringing all kinds of conversational and text data together and looking at text analytics in a universal way. And a lot of the companies we were competing against had text on surveys or text on social media or text in the contact center, right? Or text off of online reviews. They were silos, and we saw an opportunity to apply text to everything in a common data model and a common kind of language understanding model, an NLU model. And as we showed that could work, other vendors continued to sort of innovate in silos, but then there was a gradual consolidation that occurred. I think with large language models, the same is happening, right? A lot of startups and even a lot of existing big companies are throwing text analytics as wrappers on siloed platforms, right? And that's
Right.
the first wave. But what you'll often find is that either the bigger companies or fast growing startups will realize that they can apply this technology to more different sources than the one that they started with. And I think they will start to become more omni-channel. Having said that, though, I do think companies that do have a natural, orientation towards omni-channel already are taking their current platforms and using LLMs on top. They're just not calling it omni-channel as much because that's not the word that catches fire, right? What's really catching fire is AI.
Yeah, so it's not de rigueur, as it were.
It's exactly right. I mean, the new word everyone needs to use is AI. And in fact, I mean, Medallia is an omni-channel platform. If you look at some of our largest customers, we're bringing in digital sessions and chats and obviously surveys and contact center data. The big retailers, the big hospitality companies, we're now layering this new innovation on top. We're not saying it's omni-channel first, right? It's not the headline because they already know it is. Our customers do. What we're
Right.
saying is it's now AI powered because that is the new thing.
Right.
But under the covers, omni-channel is still alive and well.
Yeah.
I really believe that.
I mean, thank you. I mean, it's an interesting perspective. It's just like it's almost a bit like we kind of move to. It's like we follow memes around. It's like, oh, this is de rigueur, and then oh, this is the next thing, and it's these series of waves
Yeah.
that come along, but there's like, I guess there's an overall kind of trajectory, but the other thing that I wanted to ask you about was that within that sort of this current wave of being AI powered, we've seen a lot of brands go like headlong into this. The art of the possible. We automate as much of our contact with customers as possible. And we've seen people go all in on that and then kind of draw back of it because it's not aligned with what customers want. And it's about that striking kind of balance sort of thing. And I was wondering, do you have some clues or some advice about how brands should be striking that balance? Because it seems crucial because it's the trust, if you like, balance between brands and customers is quite fragile.
I agree with you. And actually, the approach that we're taking right now at Medallia is one that seeks to kind of cross that kind of boundary between the human and the automation in a way that's transparent, but that also gives companies and individuals time to kind of adjust to the change, right? So I'll give a few examples. We recently launched a capability to do something called Smart Response, right? Which is when you get feedback from a customer, it could be from a survey or from a phone call. Historically, what would happen is you would flag that feedback if you thought there was a need to respond to the customer. Maybe there was critical feedback, negative information, a highly risky customer based on their likelihood to churn or to complain or escalate. And so we would basically flag that customer, and then a customer service representative would we pull up a template and then basically write a response, right? Or call and have a conversation that's completely sort of human generated. What we found is that AI is really good at interpreting all of that conversation and interaction feedback that precedes the callback or the closed loop. And now we can actually templatize a response that's highly responsive, highly relevant, and frankly, highly empathetic. Right now, we don't automate that response back, at least not yet. And so we basically provide it to the human, right? The person that's going to call the customer, say, here's a suggested response. Look at it, check the box so that you know it's an AI response. And then if you want to send it, go for it. If you want to edit it, you should do that, right? And we make it very clear that there's an opportunity to basically personalize, right, that response. And I think it's important to do that. The other thing is, I think we're finding that in CX, you can use AI in a couple of different domains. The first is to develop a better insight about what to do, right? If I see a negative set of interactions or an opportunity to improve a product or potentially an opportunity to kind of build a closer relationship with a customer to drive more loyalty or revenue, we can identify that, and then the human can make a decision. The second wave is we can actually recommend actions for that marketer or support person, right, or product person to basically build a better, product or capability to drive those actions. And instead of just giving you analytics, we give them recommendations. In both cases, a human can make that decision. Where I think we're headed, though, to be very honest, and this is whether it's a year or 2 years or 5 years, I think we have to wait and see. I don't have a sense of the timeline here. I think you will find as we humans get more confident with the agility and appropriateness and frankly, relevance of AI-generated actions, we may start to take the high confidence actions and just push them through an automation workflow automatically.
Yeah.
And at that point, the human may not be in the loop, but we won't do that recklessly. I think it's important to build trust that this technology is at least as good as the human, if not better. And I think we all have to adjust to that in a way that makes sense to us as organizations and as individuals.
And that was one of the things I was going to ask you about, relative to that, because when you've got that human in the loop where you're suggesting an automated sort of response, where you're giving the people, the agents, the ability to edit it and then approve it, or just to do something completely different.
Yeah.
You're matching that against the queries and then the actions from the agent in terms of the human loop, and then as the confidence, I guess, increases over kind of time, then you get that if you let the boundaries of what is simple and what can be automated then increases over time.
That's exactly right. And to be honest, in some of the early use cases that we've deployed with some of this automated action through the smart response, or even some of the predictive recommendations where we say, here's what you can do to do your job better. We're using that in the contact center and digital analytics. These technologies humans are sort of testing and learning with it and kind of auditing, is this good? Is it as good as I would have determined? And finding that we're 80 to 90% aligned with what a human would determine by actually manually reviewing and sort of deciding what to do. So I think 80 to 90% is actually quite good. Arguably humans will vary on what to do at least 10 to 15% of the time, even if they're, talented and very, very experienced. So I think we are quickly closing that gap. That isn't to say I'm going to endorse, throwing all decisions out to the robots, right? I don't think we're ready for that yet as humans, but I think we need to be very mindful of the fact that this technology is getting quite good quite quickly, right? So
and probably faster than many people sort of really appreciate. But also, it's interesting. I went and did a course. It was on it's like future planning type of course, and it was the Copenhagen Center for Future Studies. Apparently, it's quite a well-established thing. And they had a way of framing things, which I thought was kind of really useful. There's like, when you do like scenario planning, you acknowledge that there are forces that are pulling you into the future, and then there's forces that are pushing you into the kind of the future, and that could be your own motivation, your own desire, but there's also the promise of new technology. And that's what we normally can look at those two things. But one of the things we don't necessarily acknowledge or pay much attention to is the anchors about where we're at and how that kind of balances off those two things. And there's a reality that many big brands have some serious anchors, and it will take this. Even though the technology is, the promise of it and the potential of it is enormous, we have to realize the reality that they're in, and that may be the kind of, it's like for them it might be like driving with the handbrake on for a little while until they kind of sort themselves out. Yeah.
There was a very good article I read a week or so ago. I think it was in the New York Times. It was written by a woman who had graduated university back in the late 80s, early 90s, sort of my generation, right?
Right.
And she talked about how, and I remember this because this is my lived experience as well, that she came into the working force when PCs started to proliferate, right, everywhere. But her boss, she started out as a receptionist, then moved her way up into chief of staff of a company, and her boss still asked her to type all his letters, to type all of his correspondence, to read all his emails, right? Print them out, because he was of a generation that wasn't ready to adopt this sort of self-service mentality with personal computing, right? Now, as her generation, my generation, moved up through the workforce, we all have keyboards, right? We all do our own work.
Yeah.
We don't need our executive assistants to type things for us anymore. The generational adoption will happen and people will take advantage of this new technology. I think the same is true of AI, right? There are some of us early adopters who, even despite our gray hair, are going all in on this stuff, but most of us are not, right? And it's going to take our kids, or at least that kind of sandwich generation between me and my kids, to sort of really embrace this technology. But it's going to happen. I mean, you can't stop a rolling, boulder down a hill. It's just, you can't do it.
No, right? Absolutely. I also wanted to then just kind of circle back to something you said. You talked about the impact of LLMs and this the new technologies on insights. And because I know there was something that you said, and that made me think about something you said before, where you talked about the role of LLMs in disrupting dashboard-centric use cases for CX. And I was like going, that sounds related to that. Can you explain what you mean by that?
Yeah, I can. I mean, the best way to describe it is through an analogy. I mean, if you have Siri on your phone, or you've used the Google or Alexa assistants over the last few years, I have a couple of them in my house, right? Initially, it was just a toy. I didn't quite know what to do with it. I would ask it the time, right? That's it. But they are getting good, and I'm finding that a lot of things I would normally pull up my phone or, pick up a newspaper or online newspaper nowadays, right? I just ask the assistant, right? And I'm at the point now where I'm not using my eyes and my hands to get information. I'm actually just speaking to this thing, right?
Mhm.
And I think that when you think about these assistants have not yet found their way into the world of business in anywhere near the same way they have in our consumer lives. But what large language models can do now, because they are so knowledgeable, they're kind of trained to understand the context of the world, and they can become even more kind of corporately knowledgeable when you merge the models with data from the company, whether it's
Yeah.
customer data or financial data or product data, right? Very quickly, we're going to start talking to our computers at work,
Mhm.
right? And our computers are going to be able to do what LLMs are good at in general, right? They can analyze, they can synthesize, they can recommend. And with the capability of agentic AI, they can actually have agency, they can take actions, right? And when we start using AI through a language interface to do those things, we're not going to be staring at computers. We're not going to be looking at dashboards anywhere near as much as we do today.
Mhm.
And I would argue, again, as that younger generation comes up through the workforce, they may just put those off to the side and they'll be like the old, typewriters that used to be on desks 30 years ago, 40 years ago. Right.
So rather than kind of like having, you made custom made kind of like dashboards and analytic kind of charts and things, it might just be a case of tell me what the biggest kind of like issues are with my customer base or in this
Yeah.
kind of segment or for this part of the kind of country for over the last kind of 24 hours. And then also tell me what we're doing about it.
Yeah, I mean, again, I'll give you three kind of examples of queries I might ask my AI for CX in 5 years or so. I might say, hey assistant, tell me what happened yesterday. What were the positive and negative outcomes in my business I should be aware of, right?
Mhm.
And why? So that I'm getting insights. The second is, hey AI, tell me what I should do today based on current fires and current opportunities in my business, based on customer experience, feedback, suggestions, observe problems. And so I can, in fact, give me a 10-point list and I'll just work through them. Right. And that's my priority for the day.
Mhm.
Or the third type of action is actually these 10 things that you gave me, you, assistant, can do three of them for me. Just go do them for me and tell me when you're done. Right.
Yeah.
And there you go. I mean, that's not conceptually that far away from where we are today.
Well, no, particularly when you kind of like you throw in, people are talking about, for the last couple of years, all talk was about generative AI, and this year
Mhm.
seems to be that it's been displaced by agentic AI. And there's a lot of people that are talking about agentic AI, and what they're talking about isn't agentic AI, but there's like
Yeah.
basically a whole bunch of discrete agents that aren't really tacked
Yeah.
together. But when you actually tack things together that are doing discrete kind of tasks that can do things that tackle more complex kind of problems and can take actions on your behalf, I guess that becomes a reality, and it's within grasp in many cases.
It is. It is. If you start to get a little futuristic and start thinking about what does agentic AI really mean, it again at its core, agentic AI is, and I like the use of the word agency, right? It's an AI that has agency. It can
Mhm.
actually initiate a process, a task, an action, right? And those processes themselves can have multiple types of actions, right? One can be they can literally just automate what would have been a keystroke that you would take on a computer. The second is it could automate a conversation with a third party, right? Right. And then the third is, and this is again a little bit, blue sky here, but it's not that far away. As you imagine that we all start to have agentic AIs, you have one, I have one, my drugstore has one, my retailer has one. My agentic AI can actually talk to my merchant or my corporate customers AI, and essentially we're just ordering these bots around to do things for us, and then they all kind of either communicate to people, processes, or things, right? So it's going to be a very weird world in a very short period of time, and I do think a lot of this is going to be revolving around customer experience,
Yeah.
right? Kind of changing the way we think about experiences between companies and customers.
And I guess my question then out of that is like, if that's the future,
Yeah.
then what is the role of the human touch in all of that? What is the role of the executive or the agent or the representative kind of in all of that? I mean, are people going to talk to people anymore?
Well, I hope so. I mean, I do think that there are a few things that I have high confidence we have to do, and then there are a few things that I'm not sure about. But I'll start with the things I'm sure about first. The first is any AI is only as good as its master, its trainer, right?
Mm-hmm.
AI fundamentally learns based on the information you give it, right, and the things you teach it, so that it has awareness about. And today, that is a human task, right? So we all have to determine: does this AI understand my business? Does it understand my terms of use? Does it understand the things that my customers care about, right? And that's going to be feedback. That's going to be experience data. It's going to be all the things that we basically want it to know about us, at least in the abstract. Maybe not about every one of us personally. I think we're going to start with a very anonymized view of this. So that's us teaching it and giving it the right information so it can be a good worker, if you will, for us, right? The second thing is, I do think that AI, like anything that is kind of machine learned artificial intelligence, does need to be periodically refreshed, right? In the world of AI, there's this concept of model drift, right?
Yeah.
You build an AI, and if you don't check it on it every period, every 6-12 months, it might shift away from the reality of the practical world.
Mm-hmm.
So you need to bring it back. And I think it's important for us to make sure that we model and audit these systems every few months, or at least every twice a year or so.
Mm-hmm.
And that's going to be important for us. And that's going to be done by people that kind of build and maintain these systems. But as executives, I think it's our job to make sure that we manage the AI to make sure that it's actually driving good brand-oriented values for our customer, right? And
Mm-hmm.
that's about, is this at least as good or as empathetic? And there's always going to be an escape hatch, right? If something can't be done by a machine, you have to have a human. I remember talking to one of the leaders at one of the big telecom companies a few years ago, and he said, we believe automation is going to fundamentally transform customer experience in the contact centers. He said, we're going to have fewer agents as a percentage of total interactions, because
Mm-hmm.
we're going to use IVRs, and then we're going to use chatbots, and we're going to use voice bots, and all this is going to evolve over the next 5-10 years. He said, but there will always be a human last point of contact when the machine fails or the machine can't handle the creative use case.
Yeah.
And he said those interactions, all the short interactions will go away, right? All the sort of transactional interactions will get automated. But when you get to a human, that's when you need true human curiosity, relationship building, and ultimately that kind of high touch, high value, often high duration interaction.
Yeah.
And I think that is the case. So for all of us, and again, for our kids, I think it's important for us to make sure we teach those values, right?
Yeah.
Curiosity, human touch, human relationship, empathy, because that fundamentally is the last mile that that you can't necessarily just assign to a technology right now.
And I think the thing that's important, another important dimension that's worth factoring in here is that it's not as if we're building organizations that are becoming simpler.
No, not at all.
And so we're always adding new products and new services, and not necessarily retiring things kind of faster than we're adding sort of stuff. So you end up with this product catalog or service line catalog that just keeps growing and growing and growing. Therefore, inherently, the complexity of things just grows.
That's exactly right.
And the body of things that you have to serve just kind of grows. And being able to understand that and to navigate that and understand where expertise sits in the organization to be able to solve these increasingly complex kind of problems, I think is going to be a fundamental skill when you can when you're faced with those kind of problems.
Yeah, and by the way, there's one other actually point I'll make, which is when you think about why do people adopt technology or innovation in general in business, they're not just doing it because they think it's interesting or cool, right? At the end of the day, we're all running businesses, and we want to either create a qualitative or quantitative improvement in how we go to business, right?
Mm-hmm.
And a qualitative is my customers feel better about the business. They have more brand loyalty. They have more, desire to do business with me. The quantitative markers are I'm actually driving better outcomes,
Mm-hmm.
more good versus bad outcomes. I'm driving more efficiency, right? I can do more with less, or I can at least do more with the same amount, right? And then the last is I'm actually driving some degree of reduced risk or competitive advantage or other things, right? So these technologies, if they just are embedded in organizations because we think customers want them, but they don't create actual outcomes. So it's very important to look at all of this through the lens of, am I achieving outcomes that are important to me as a company and to my customers? And if I'm not, there's no reason to adopt them, right?
Yeah. And I think that's people have to keep that in mind. I mean, I always kind of I said a number of times to different sort of people, different groups of people, which which slightly confounds them, because I say the future of customer experience, or pretty much anything really, is always built in the present.
Yes.
And what I mean by that is because if we don't attend to the problems and the questions and that customers have and the relationships we have with those customers, if we don't attend to those today, then we potentially forfeit our chance to build on them tomorrow. And so you've got to, and leaders in their fields tend to understand that you end up with these almost like competing priorities, having to prepare for the future, but also attend to kind of like current kind of problems. Whereas like followers are all like, oh, we need to focus on disruption, and they're always planning for tomorrow. And then they go, why is the house burning down? And you're like going, well, because you haven't been paying attention.
Right. Right.
And I think there's
you have to keep your eyes on both the current and the future. I 100% agree with that.
Yeah.
Making big bets without anchoring yourself to what you have to do in the here and now can cause, honestly, it can cause experience gaps, right?
Yeah.
Launching a new product before you've basically thought about how it's going to disrupt everything about your business and your customers. That's actually not the way to innovate. I totally agree.
Yeah, perfect. So we've talked about a whole bunch of kind of things, and I know we're getting short on time, but I wanted to ask you: is there anything else you want to add or highlight that we've kind of missed out before I ask you some rapid fire kind of relatively rapid fire kind of like questions to wrap up?
Yeah, I mean, I did want to touch on, and I think we did just a few minutes ago, on this concept of, we're talking a lot about innovation and kind of the new technology that's adopting. But to me, at the end of the day, I'm a fairly practical person when it comes to innovation. Shouldn't be just innovation for the sake of innovation, right? It needs to be something that actually creates a qualitatively or demonstrably greater value than what you have today. And I think that's true of AI today.
Right.
Blindly adopting technology just because you think it might be interesting is ultimately the path towards potentially disconnecting from your customers. And I don't recommend that at all. So,
perfect.
Yeah.
So thank you for that. So here we go.
Yeah.
We've talked about a whole bunch of things. I always like people to boil it down. And I've been doing that recently by asking people to complete this sentence. And the sentence is, if you want to improve your customer experience, Sid says, do this, ... Over to you to complete the sentence.
Okay. I'm going to complete that with a don't, not a do, if that's okay.
That's fine.
Don't assume because a technology looks easy that you should build a solution from scratch, right? And what I mean by that is, we can all feel very empowered when we play with, for instance, ChatGPT or generative AI and say, a kid could use this. And truthfully, a kid can use ChatGPT. But that doesn't mean you should basically completely transform your business by having your developers in-house and go build a brand new, marketing automation system or CX platform or other things. Because at the end of the day, CX and essentially AI embedded into business processes is really about having the right data aggregation, the right platform for scale, the right analytics and prompts and use cases that are built and maintained in many cases by companies, technology, software companies that have a lot of prior knowledge about the domain in which they're trying to build the solution. And frankly, those organizations can support you going forward. This comes up again whenever there's an innovation disruption in any space. It happened when we went from mainframes to PCs to cloud, right? Cloud now to AI-powered systems. Everyone thinks I can just build this myself, right? I can build an application with Power Builder. I can build my own private clouds. And eventually the companies that do things at scale end up having a better value proposition. Total cost of ownership is always a factor when you're building something new. And I just encourage any company to say, yes, just because I can build it doesn't mean I can compete with it or I can support it as efficiently as if I partner with companies that, I trust to basically make me successful. And I think that's true with CX today, even more, even though there's a lot of new technology that a lot of people feel like they can just use on their own.
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah.
So my second question, and it's a punk question, and why not? Because it's the Punk CX podcast. So here's a question. What company or brand do you think is taking a more punk approach to CX, and why?
Can I give you two? I have two
of course
that I'd like to highlight. So, and they're both Medallia customers because why not, right? So one of them is Jaguar Land Rover over in your neck of the woods, JLR. They've built a very, I think, compelling solution that is truly omni-channel. They collect signals when people are shopping online on their digital website. They use both digital sessions and digital feedback to make sure they understand who you are, what you're interested in, potentially where you are. And then if they don't see a completion of a journey towards scheduling a visit or a test drive, they will actually reach out to cultivate and curate your interest based on what they've seen. They'll collect feedback along the way. They'll push information out to the retail locations closest to you and basically create a customer experience and a conversation that ultimately they believe has created a very technology-driven but human-powered, intimacy that they can quantify has created a lot more revenue, both in terms of getting new customers and getting customers at a certain point in time to stay within the JLR family. And it's a very, very great use of customer orchestration, feedback collection, digital session, and ultimately human touch, right? And it's one that they swear by, and it's powered by a lot of underlying Medallia technology.
Nice.
The other one is here in the U.S. Obviously, there's a lot going on here in Washington, D.C. You might have read about. But we've been working with the Financial Student Aid Program, FSA, which is part of the Department of Education. They are essentially the national lender of last resort for a lot of people who need government grants and student loans. And we started working with them about a year and a half ago now, maybe 2 years ago, to basically expand their customer experience listening into the contact center. And when you dive into conversations, you actually have a lot of ability to understand not just why people call, but how to drive better answers, more efficient responses, reduce things like unresolved calls or first call resolution, as well as provide insight to help your agents on the phone do better at their jobs, and also even create outer loop insights about processes and product issues and other things that can be worked out through digital and other kind of self-service means, so that a lot of the people coming into a contact center have more knowledge coming in, or actually can take care of their issues without having to call in. And it creates qualitatively better experiences. There's a bright lens being shined on driving efficiency here right now in the U.S. government, and that program has survived the scrutiny of that lens because it's not only improving qualitatively the customer experiences, but it's actually driving efficiency and transformation for that agency.
Nice. Yeah. And so the final question, and this is more of a, it's like a personal request really, because I find myself, because it's the world is a bit of a weird place right now. There's lots going on all over the place.
Yeah. Yes.
And headlines are dominated by this and that, and most of them are not great, if I could say kindly, or generously. So I've been looking for people to share their own personal good news story with me. So, Sid, what have you seen that you in the last week that you thought it is a good news story? It's like interesting, positive, or exciting thing. It could be business or kind of personal related stuff, but just so we end on a bit of a high note. That's not to say the rest of the kind of the conversation was a downer. Not at all. That has been brilliant. But tell me a good news story.
All right. Well, I'm going to make this one personal just because it happened to me personally yesterday. So I am part of an organization of business executives and founders and leaders. I signed up about 2.5 months ago to learn how to do improv comedy. Okay. And so we hired a coach. There were about 8 of us, and we basically spent 6 weeks basically mastering our craft of being stand-up comedians. And the premise behind stand-up comedy is, and if you ever get bored, go on YouTube or Instagram or whatnot, and you'll find that this is actually a kind of a paradigm that is generally applicable. The way to do stand-up comedy is you have to identify a truth, right? I'm a geek, right? A problem, something that happens because of your truth, right? And then the feelings either that you have or the people around you as you master or go through those problems. And so I put together about 10, 15 minutes of stand-up, and I was scared to death, right? Going into this thing. I actually performed last night with a group of friends, and they were all very friendly audience, but thankfully, not only did they like it, they loved it. And it was a fantastic event. So in spite of all the crazy, sometimes if you can get together with friends, learn something new, and just have a really fun time about it, for a moment, you can kind of forget about all the challenges in the world.
So thank you for sharing that. So should I send a note to Mark telling them that you might be asking for some time off because you might be wanting to go on tour?
I'll be touring. I'll come check you. I'll check out if I make it up to Scotland. So
well, come to the Fringe Festival, because that's where people cut their teeth.
I might do that. Maybe that's for my next gap year, in a few years when I retire for real. Who knows? So
there you go. You'd be most welcome. But anyway, Sid, thank you so much for great to see you in Vegas. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast and welcome back to the fold and things. And thank you for sharing your time and your expertise and your insight with me today. That's been awesome.
All right. Well, I appreciate it, Adrian. And it's always a pleasure to chat with you as well. Thank you so much.
Wow, what a great interview. I hope you enjoyed it. I know I did. Find out more about me and the work that I do at adrianswinscoe.com. Do leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. And if you have any comments, feedback, or questions about the podcast, then feel free to send me a message to podcast@adrianswinscoe.com. And do tune in again. Thanks very much.